debt. So then what's America do? It's not under Obama. Well, it is, but first it's under Bush. And I will beg your audience, like I'll give everybody 75 cents if you will just go and, PayPal me. I'll hit you up. Just strike that. You know what I mean? Go and read The Redirection by Seymour Hersh from 2007. What happens is Elliot Abrams and Zalmay Khalilzad and a couple of the other neoconservatives tell Bush, listen, man, we really screwed up. We're fighting this whole war for the Shiites. The Israelis are freaking out. The Saudis are really upset. And you can read in the WikiLeaks where Zalmay Khalilzad goes and talks to the king in January of 2006. And the king says, it was always us and you guys and Saddam against Iran. Now you have given Iraq to Iran on a golden platter. And Khalilzad says, oh, I'm so sorry, Your Highness. We're going to make it up to you. So it's not just Israel here. There's all these countries have their interests. And that was certainly part of it. So they launched this redirection and they started backing bin Ladenite groups in Libya, the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria. Liz Cheney was a big part of this, creating the Syrian National Council as part of the State Department at that time under W. Bush and bringing the Muslim Brotherhood groups in. Like this was their risk, was we're going to try to bring these Muslim Brotherhood groups in and see how moderate they could be. Well, Syrian Muslim Brotherhood are pretty Al-Qaeda terrorists-like. They sit in the parliament in Qatar. I don't know. They had renounced violence in Egypt. But in Syria, yeah, they're throat-cutting loonies still, I guess. And that was the people that Liz Cheney had hired. And they backed this group called Jandala, who are horrible suicide bomber, head chopper maniacs in Iran as well. So that was the policy that Obama inherited. So when you and your family were sitting around the dinner table saying, it's so weird that America's backing bin Ladenite suicide bombers in Syria right now, Dad, what do you think's behind that? The answer was the redirection, son. Barack Obama is picking up where George Bush left off. And he's making up for George Bush's massive blunder in Iraq War II, which W. Bush wouldn't call it that way, but that was what he was doing. That was what redirection means. Oops, we better try to turn this thing around somehow. So what they do, they put Iran up 2 pegs in Iraq. So now it fell on Obama to try to take Iran down at least 1 peg in Syria. And so, yes, as you said in your question, Obama backed Al-Qaeda suicide bombers. Al-Nusra is Al-Qaeda. I dreamed about this, I think last night or maybe the night before last. Everyone could look it up. It's Victoria Nuland, of all people, Robert Kagan's wife, the lady who got us into so much trouble in Ukraine and all over the place. She was the press secretary for the State Department at the time. And you can go and find it at state.gov, December 2012. Jabhat al-Nusra is just an alias for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. That is the vanguard of the Sunni insurgency that resisted America and Shiite power in the civil war in Iraq War II. Zarqawi's head chopper, suicide bomber, berserker maniacs, who the local Sunni population had killed off for us, by the way, and had chased right out of the country, by the way. It wasn't David Petraeus in the surge that beat Al-Qaeda. It was the awakening, and that wasn't even because of American money. Even that was getting out ahead of the parade. Local Sunnis didn't want to live like Saudis in Iraq. Local Sunnis told these bin Ladenites, beat it or you're going to get shot, and they did. And so they had been welcome for a while and had been more harm than good for the Sunni insurgency anyway, and wore out their welcome very quickly. And it was a miracle. Honestly, man, George W. Bush turned all of Western Iraq into jihadi university for 5 years. And then the locals started murdering the hell out of them to death. It was like, man, you could have never asked for a magic wish to come true like that. How is this horrible, horrible error ever going to be corrected? Local Sunnis in Iraq and Western Iraq are like, you know what? We'll kill them for you. In fact, we'll just kill them for us, and got rid of them. But then what happened? Barack Obama comes with the defibrillator, billions of dollars, and brings them right back to life in alliance with Israel. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, a little bit Kuwait, although I don't know, but mostly Qatar, and UAE some too. But especially, Qatar and Turkey are very in tight with the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Saudis have a kind of bifurcated relationship with them. They hate them in most places, but back them in Yemen, for example. And ended up being all different kinds of groups fighting in the jihad there. But the most important thing for the distinction to understand the story for us here is they were the Sunnis. And look here, it wasn't Hezbollah, the Shiites, who knocked our towers down. That was bin Laden who did that. And it wasn't the Shiites that killed 4,000 of our guys in Iraq War II. Although they did kill about 500 of them, but that was all Petraeus' fault for picking that fight 100% with Sadr. But still, the 4,000 of the 4,500 Americans who died in Iraq War II died fighting the Sunni insurgency. And Al-Qaeda was the vanguard of that, the worst of the suicide bombers on the Sunni insurgency side, AQI, which if you remember that war, you're probably too young. But if people remember that war, our government pretended that the entire Sunni insurgency were these guys because they were so horrible that they discredited the entire movement. It was the same kind of thing in Syria, where
when you say, obviously just for the audience, when you say Obama, the US, its allies pumped all this money into groups like Al-Nursra and terrorist groups, do you mean it as we pumped lots of arms and money into the FSA and the moderates, and then Al-Nursra and the other groups were stronger, so they took the arms, or was it an actual policy, or did it vary, obviously, depending on the country? Did we directly, purposely back them, or is it we're going to back these groups, we know the arms are going to fall into these groups, and they're the stronger groups, and everyone knew Al-Nusra and the others were the fighting force taking more territory? So was it direct, as in we actually armed, or we armed them through our Gulf allies, or was it indirect, plausible deniability? Where do you make the distinction?
Yes, that is all exactly correct, right? I mean, and it also depends on which all countries you're talking about and which year of the thing and this and that. But yes, there's a lot of deniability in there, a lot of, no, I swear we're only backing mythical moderates, but then somehow all the money and weapons are going to the extremists. But it's also the case, especially in this situation regarding Turkey and Saudi, where they're just paying directly to ISIS, and nobody's even pretending they're not. And this is even after ISIS has broken off from Nusra. And that just essentially means the Iraqi-dominated faction of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria broke away from the Syrian-dominated faction of Al-Qaeda in Iraq and Syria, and declared that we want to have our caliphate now. And first they conquered all of eastern Syria, including Raqqa, in 2013, and then a year later they rolled right in June of 14. They rolled right in and conquered all of western Iraq, and that was how the caliphate was created. And in that situation, you know what? Like, I really don't know, and I have no need to reach out over past my skis here. I don't think it's necessary, and I don't have any actual evidence or strong indication that Obama's CIA was telling Saudi, yes, more money for ISIS, please, right? I don't know that that's right, but it's kind of completely beside the point, right? Essentially, you know what? I'll tell you something. I learned a little wisdom this year from a guy who I interviewed in my big special that I did about the Waco massacre 30 years ago. The guy's name is David Hardy, and he wrote the best book about Waco. And it's called This Is Not an Assault. And he had been a former federal cop in the Interior Department. So he had a little bit of understanding about how these federal cops think that really helped contribute to his ability to explain the Waco situation in his books. Part of why he did such a great job. But one of the things that he said to me was, you have to understand in these government bureaucracies, and this rang really true to me. I immediately thought of Syria when he said this, okay? He says, in a government bureaucracy, there's the truth, there's falsity, and then there's our position. And our position, he says, exists on an entirely separate plane of reality from truth and falsity. They have nothing to do with it. Our position is the thing we all agreed on when we were in a room and decided to think and do a thing. And whatever incentives are involved in that, money, office politics, and position, and jockeying for power and attention, and all the things that go, along with all that, future opportunities that are going to come. All those reasons aside, our position is our position. And now it's not just written on paper. Now it's engraved in granite. And now that's it. And so, for example, if everyone in the room says, yeah, you know what we're going to do, Billy, is we're going to back the mythical moderates and it's going to be great. And then Billy goes, yeah, that's right, Sally. Those moderates sure are moderate and they're going to stop all the bad guys on all sides for us if we only help them enough. And then Jill goes, yeah, and then I can get a promotion to UN ambassador. And everybody goes, yeah, this is great. Then that's how war gets started, right? And then meanwhile, you and me and everybody reading antiwar.com every day is going, wait a minute. These mythical moderates are just giving all the money and all the weapons to the suicide bombers who don't mind fighting, don't mind dying, and are going out there and leading the thing. You act like a bunch of citizen militias are going to rise up like the American Revolution and are, all the finest gentlemen in Aleppo are going to rise up and lead this revolution. Well, that's not right. It's a bunch of bin Ladenite head chopper lunatics. There was a kid it could have been 13. I think it was in 2012 where a guy said, hey, kid, give me a discount on this fruit. Like, charge me price for this orange. And the kid said to him, hey, listen, pal, if you were Muhammad himself, I got to charge you full price for the orange, And an Al-Nusra guy said, what did you say? And shot the kid in the face and killed him. Right? That was who these guys were. They were insane, lunatic, suicide bomber, bin Ladenite terrorist murderers. But our position says, well, yeah, that's why we got to back the moderates more, because the more power the moderates have, the more they'll marginalize extremists like that, and they'll be able to take on all the extremists on the Sunni side, as well as Assad and his Alawite-led, primarily Sunni, by the way, army. And their Shiite friends, as well as Hezbollah, who had come from Lebanon to help fight, as well as Iran, who had sent their IRGC officers to come and train and coordinate the war on the ground. And you can see how this is just nuts. It's just nuts. But if anybody says to them, yeah, but look, you're just backing the bad guys, they go, no, we're backing the mythical moderates. And they stuck with that line, and look, they know they're lying. I'm not making excuses for them. I'm just saying they get married to our position in a way where they just can't abandon it. We see the same thing over and over. It's the same thing with Iraq War II, where Iraq War II was supposed to be wonderful. And then it went completely to hell. And everybody who had supported it said, oh, yeah, no, we meant to do that. See, it's the flypaper theory. We're trying to draw terrorists to Iraq so we can kill them there. But it's like, dude, you're generating new terrorists by the thousands. Don't give me that crap. But what were they going to do? Admit that they were wrong? No, they come up with new excuses. They come up with a reason why what they did wasn't wrong. There's, some kind of credibility to be found, or some redemption to be found in their policy. And in fact, then look at the end of the Syrian war. So it grew up into the caliphate. And Obama then, what did he do, by the way? The caliphate, they seized Mosul and most of Western Iraq in June of 14. And what did Obama do? He sat around for 8 weeks telling the Shiites, beg me, come on, and refusing to come to their aid. Not that I'm for intervention. I opposed it at the time, but that's not the question. The question is, what was Obama doing? He was letting these bin Ladenites absolutely hammer the crap out of the Shiites that we had fought Iraq War II for, including massacring their military cadets, 1,700 Air Force cadets massacred at Camp Speicher, and just these horrific massacres of civilians all over the place. Then Obama came in, he launched Iraq War III in the summer of 14 to destroy the caliphate that he had built to spite the Shiites that Bush had fought Iraq War II for and wished he hadn't. Now, what's Obama doing? Fighting another war for those same Shiites again. Because, oops, this bin Ladenite caliphate is a bridge too far. This guy Baghdadi up there on the balcony at the Great Mosque in Mosul, like a cross between bin Laden and Mussolini, declaring himself the dictator. This is never going to fly. So they had to, what? I swear this is true. It's documented in my book. I got the quotes. U.S. Air Force lit early flying cover for the Iranian IRGC on the ground in the Battle of Tikrit, Saddam Hussein's hometown, to force the Islamic State Caliphate out of there on behalf of the Shiites, led by Iran. And so,
when you reference the 1,700 airmen there, is that the same? You know, I've learned this through you, obviously. The clip of Michael Oren, the Israeli ambassador to the US, where he's with Jeffrey Goldberg, and he says right after ISIS takes over all this land. It's not at the start of it. ISIS had already taken all this land and did that massacre where he said they prefer the Sunni evil, as in ISIS, Al-Nursra, all of those kind of guys, rather than the Shia, meaning Iran and kind of, you know, Syria in that. Is that the kind of the reference?
And what I'm going to say is harsh, and perhaps a little edgy. But if we have to choose the lesser of evils here, the lesser evil is the Sunnis over the Shiites. For the reason
You're
I
not
mentioned
speaking
before.
for me.
Okay, it's a lesser evil. It's an evil, believe me, it's a terrible evil. Again, they've just taken out 1,700 former Iraqi soldiers and shot them in a field. But who are they fighting against? They're fighting against the proxy with Iran that's complicit in the murder of 160,000 people in Syria. You can just, do the math. And again, one side is armed with suicide bombers and rockets. The other side has access to military nuclear capabilities. So from Israel's perspective, if someone's got, if there's got to be an evil that's going to prevail, let the Sunni evil prevail. And I'm speaking entirely for myself.
Exactly. And thank you for bringing me back to the Israeli role here. It's not central to it, but yeah, sort of, kind of it is. I mean, the neocons, again, they launched Iraq War II for Israel to limit Iranian power and influence over Hezbollah on their northern border so they could get away with stealing the West Bank. And then, so, oops, that only empowered Iran and Hezbollah and Syria. So then, oops, they had to go and launch this horrible war in Syria on behalf of the bin Ladenites in order to limit that damage, which then blew up so big that they ended up having to launch Iraq War III to destroy it again. But during that whole period of support for the bad guys for the Sunni side in Syria, Israel is in on it. And especially later in the game, they said, and I think that this is right. It depends on who you ask. Michael Oren said, we always wanted Assad gone from the beginning of the war. He told that to the Jerusalem Post. And he had been Netanyahu's ambassador to the United States. There were others there was one guy who told Isabel Kirshner at the New York Times that we want both sides to continue to hemorrhage to death. We don't want either side to win. I think they were saying they wanted ultimately for Assad to survive. Better the devil you know. But if we can keep them fighting as long as possible, we're happy with that. But then once the ISIS caliphate broke off, then in 2013, and then even after they conquered all of Western Iraq, numerous Israeli officials said that they liked it that way. They preferred it, and most especially Michael Oren in that clip that you're talking about. And I'll urge your audience to go. All you got to do is go to YouTube and just type in Oren. That's O-R-E-N. Just type in Oren Sunnis, and it comes right up. That's it. That's all you need. Oren Sunnis.
I'll clip it up. I'll put a clip of it literally over this so they can watch it. They don't even need to go there. But
so you see, he disclaims a couple times there. Okay, now that we're back from the clip, he disclaims a couple times, hey, this is just my opinion. But then he also says, from Israel's point of view, because he's clearly speaking for Netanyahu and his government here. And he's saying, we prefer the Sunni evil to the Shia evil. And as you said, he explicitly references 1,700 Iraqi Air Force cadets being taken out back and shot in the head, massacred. I think these were the ones who were all laid down on the basketball court and just machine gunned to death with AK-47s. Possibly is partial that. And then there's also the guys who were all shot in the head and thrown in the river, one after another by these ISIS guys. I'm not sure if that was the same massacre or not. Anyway, certainly the machine gunning of all the cadets laying down on the basketball court. And Oren explicitly references that. So in other words, he's not saying, well, we like these mythical moderates from the Free Syrian Army. He's not saying that. He's explicitly referencing ISIS at their worst atrocity and saying, yeah, but still, no, that's totally cool because we prefer them to Iran. And then what's his excuses for that? Which, by the way, even Jeffrey Goldberg is like, hey, pal, you're not speaking for me here. But what's his excuse? He says, well, because Iran has military nuclear technology and because Assad is responsible for all the deaths in the war. Well, but both of those things are completely ridiculous, stupid lies. What is he talking about? Everybody knows that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. If Iran was making nuclear weapons, they'd have an arsenal by now, since we live deep into the future here. And Benjamin Netanyahu, for one, has been saying they're working on nukes since 1992. And here they still don't have any of this 1945 technology, atom splitting machine here, because they're not trying to make them, because the Ayatollah forbid it. Now, you don't have to trust the Ayatollah, but I'm saying look at the result. They never did make atom bombs, okay? It is what it is. So it's just a lie. And then to blame Assad for every death in the war is completely preposterous. He's putting down a foreign-sponsored insurrection that's mostly being fought by foreign mercenaries anyway. That's an invasion by a bunch of foreign mercenaries. This isn't a revolution. And any such armed insurrection in any Western country would also be crushed with force. We have elections around here, even if you don't have elections around there. They're not letting those people overthrow the government anymore. What do you think Barack Obama would do? A bunch of head chopping lunatics try to take over DC. He would send the American Army infantry out there to obliterate them to death with fire until they were all gone, is what he would do. Same for any president, would do the same thing. Hell, look what Coolidge did to the bonus army. I mean, these were America's heroic World War I veterans, and he sent MacArthur and Eisenhower, and they were unarmed. They were unarmed. They were not threatening a violent coup. They were unarmed, camping in Washington, D.C. and across the river saying, we want our World War I pensions now because we're so destitute from the Great Depression. And they weren't even threatening violence. They were just former military men, but they had not brought their rifles. And what did Coolidge do? He sent MacArthur and Eisenhower out there who gladly fixed bayonets and forced those guys right out of town. And that's in good old USA, pinnacle of global democracy, blah, blah, blah. You heard it before. So anyway, and I collect in the book, enough already, I have, I don't know, 10 or a dozen quotes of Israeli officials saying, no, we definitely prefer ISIS to Iran. We definitely prefer the Islamic State to Assad. And which is just, you think about that from an Israeli point of view, how completely crazy that is. Assad and his Syrian Arab army, they're no threat to Israel. This guy, he's not an ideologue. He didn't even want to be the dictator. His older brother died in a car wreck. He was an ophthalmologist in London when he was drafted to be the dictator of the country. And I'm not saying he's not responsible for his actions. He certainly is. And he waged a brutal war to put down that insurrection. But I'm just saying any other government, certainly any Western government would put in the same position, would have done essentially the same thing. I'm not absolving him in any way, but I'm saying it's still all Barack Obama's fault for putting him in that position 100%. And for all the responsibility of Israel, who did provide direct financial, as well as medical support for Al-Nusra fighters during that time, and same for Turkey with all of their financial and weaponry and other support, and Saudi and all of them. Let me tell you something. Barack Obama was the emperor of the world empire. And if he had picked up the phone and told the king of Saudi Arabia and the emir of Qatar and the prime minister of Israel and the president of Turkey, no, I don't give a damn what your priorities are. I'm telling you, USA's priority is keeping Al-Qaeda down, period. That's it. So all of you are just going to have to lump it. Assad stays, shut the hell up. If he had said that, the whole thing would have been over. That'd have been it. That'd have been it. The only reason any of this happened was because Barack Obama said, all right, let's do it. Signed a finding authorizing the CIA first to coordinate allied support and then eventually to go all in on training and supporting and the rest. And man, there are side stories to this thing that are beyond belief, right? Like you could make a movie about just this and people would think it was just fiction. that American Army Rangers training Al-Qaeda terrorists in Jordan were all shot and killed by the border guard, who was an ISIS guy or an Al-Nusra guy who had infiltrated the Jordanian security forces or had been a member of their forces who'd been recruited. And so here you have American Army Rangers working for the CIA, training Al-Qaeda terrorists and getting shot in the back to death. Okay? And Barack Obama was not impeached and removed from office for that. Nobody scratched the needle off the record and said, wait, what is happening? What are we doing? How is America on the side of the suicide guys who did the kamikaze attack on our towers? Because what, they're fighting Hezbollah that didn't attack us? Because they're fighting Assad with the three-piece suit and the clean-shaven chin with no religious faith at all? I mean, he's nominally an Alawite, but whatever. It's not like he's some religious fundamentalist wacko of any description, right? I mean, this is crazy. It's completely crazy. And, you know, this is why, by the way, Tulsi Gabbard seemed heroic for a minute there. Because Tulsi Gabbard fought in Iraq War II. Or she didn't really fight pulling triggers, but she was stationed at Balad Air Base north of Baghdad taking incoming shells. So like that counts, man. And it was a medical unit. So you can only imagine the guys screaming for their mama dying in her presence during that time. She went through hell during that time. And 2 years later, 3 years later, Barack Obama is saying, oh, the shirts and the skins have switched sides now. And we're now on the side of the shirts against the skins. And she went, what? This is a woman who broadly supports the war against terrorists, against bin Ladenites, and for that matter, hell, against Hezbollah even. She's for fighting against both sides of the war. But fighting for the bin Ladenites? Because we hate the Shiites more? When we just finished fighting a war for them? Against them? That doesn't make any sense. That's completely loco. And then what do? They castigated her and said, oh, she loves Assad. She's a pro-Assad traitor. Imagine thinking for a minute that this woman from Hawaii has some kind. Imagine allowing yourself to be lied to for a minute. That this woman, who is still to this day an active duty officer in the Hawaiian National Guard, was loyal, a toady, as what's her name said on the Rogan show, of Bashar al-Assad, because she said this policy is insane. Now, Iraq War II, that's wrong, really wrong, and really bad. But Syria, that's treason. That's completely nuts, and it's impossible to justify without absolutely lying your ass off and somehow pretending that Assad was responsible for every death, that Assad had no motive in the world for waking up in the morning other than to a plan to exterminate the entire population of his country. And thank goodness America and its allies were helping these plucky rebels defend the population of the country from his genocidal intent. And they're just lying. They're just lying, man. It's completely made up. The whole thing, the whole narrative was made up because it's the only way to cover for what they were doing, which again was just trying to make up for their mistake of Iraq War II, which was a completely unforced error that they did in an attempt to limit the power of the Shiites here in the first place.
Yeah, and for people who think this still sounds insane, you can hear
what my constant cry was that our biggest problem is our allies. Our allies in the region were our largest problem in Syria. The Turks were great friends, and I have a great relationship with Erdogan, which I've just spent a lot of time with. The Saudis, the Emiratis, etc. What were they doing? They were so determined to take down Assad and essentially have a proxy Sunni-Shia war. What did they do? They poured hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of tons of weapons into anyone who would fight against Assad, except that the people who were being supplied were Al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda and the extremist elements of jihadis coming from other parts of the world. Now, you think I'm exaggerating? Take a look. Where did all of this go? So now what's happening? All of a sudden, everybody's awakened because this outfit called ISIL, which was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which when they were essentially thrown out of Iraq, found open space and territory in in eastern Syria, worked with Al-Nusra, who we declared a terrorist group early on, and we could not convince our colleagues to stop supplying them.
Let me ask you, Michael, I mean, I think we've been putting an extraordinary amount of arms in, haven't we?
Yeah, and I have to say, as you said, it's a double-edged sword because you give people the ability to defend themselves, but when you pump more weapons into a situation like Syria, it doesn't end well for Syrians because there's always somebody else that's willing to pump more weapons in for the other side. The armed groups in Syria get a lot of support, not just from the United States, but from other partners. And we've never said that that
Qatar, Russia, Qatar, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, huge amount of weapons coming in, huge amount of money.
But pumping weapons in causes someone else to pump more weapons in, and you end up with a level.
I mean, the reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth. And that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government. And they supported Assad. And we know that this was growing. We were watching. We saw that Daesh was growing in strength. And we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage, that Assad might then negotiate. Instead of negotiating, you got Assad. Now you got Putin to support him.
Joe Biden doing his Harvard speech where he's like, all these cries, again, this is in your book, all the cries to the allies, Turkey, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, who were just pumping money and arms into any group like Al-Nursra who would take it. You have John Kerry caught on leak tape saying they watched ISIS grow. They thought they could manage it and use it as leverage. You have constant articles throughout. There's just endless articles about from 2012 onwards, Qatar and Saudi Arabia throwing money and arms into the war. The US, the CIA coordinating it in Turkey and Jordan, as you said. And even throughout that period, you had in 2010 Hillary Clinton's emails that came out where it talks about Saudi Arabia, Qatar, all the Gulf nations, always the top funders of terrorism. We didn't go and invade them like Afghanistan, all these other countries.